Vinod and Sunil. Our next session is on India's soft power, the promise and the perils. We'll have two presentations, two speeches, Mohandas Pai and Shashi Tharoor. And then following their talks, we'll have an interaction with the audience, unlike fireside chat. So with that, Mohandas Pai. Thank you, sir.
Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament, Chairman, Parliamentary Standing Committee of External Affairs, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this special session on India's soft power with Dr. Shashi Tharoor, Member of Parliament, former External Affairs Minister of State for India. What do we say about Shashi? Shashi is Shashi, an extraordinary individual, a great diplomat, a globalist par excellence, very articulate, persuasive in his arguments, extremely well-read, a great intellectual, and a person who can talk to you and convince you about his point of view in a very soft manner. He gave up global diplomacy to come back to India, bitten by the India bug that sometimes bites some people, to go away from Nirvana, where he was in New York, from a constituency called Thiruvananthapuram in the deep south of India in communist Kerala, to go to parliament, and he succeeded. Though possibly he joined a party, which is a very strange party right now. In parliament, his was the sane voice for reason, for growth, for acceptance. And he did many things which parliamentarians have forgotten to do in India, introduce private bills for causes to put into play the Indian Constitution, one of the most liberal constitutions ever created on this planet. And Shashi came back to power the second time he stood for an MP election. And being an MP is very hard work. In India, people come home at 4 o'clock in the morning and stay with you. They want jobs, they want connections, they want you to recommend them for many things, and you have to spend time with them. And if you don't, well, they tell you next time you come for a vote, we'll see what happens to you. And in that state, people are very articulate. They take pride in reading all the newspapers and doing a permanent debate on what happens to the world after Stalin left. They're still in that particular era. But Shashi has been a wonder. For all of us in India, Shashi is a role model of what an Indian should be. And today we have Shashi talk to us about India's soft power. Shashi has been a passionate advocate of building India's soft power by projecting India's civilizational achievements. Sadly, around the world, India is known for the wrong things, not for the right things. We need people to talk about what India really stands for. And look at India, a 5,000-year-old civilization, open its arms to everybody around the world. The Jewish people came to India 2,000 years ago after the destruction of the Second Temple, and they prospered in India. We had the Muslim invasion from the west of India, and they stayed and assimilated themselves and created a very syncretic Islam. We had people from China come to India many years ago, many hundreds of years ago, to learn about Buddhism, because to the Chinese, India was west of China. Everybody went west to learn. And India was the west of China too. Then now people come east to learn. And in India, people debated about the ultimate questions human beings ask in their lives. What is the reason for your existence? What do you do with your life? What is the ultimate goal of life? Is it wealth? Is it power? Is it an ability to influence? Is it an ability to think great thoughts? Is it an ability to contemplate? And these questions were asked by our sages many hundred years ago. And they gave some answers. India produced the most liberal open system, which was based upon not accepting dogma, but questioning all the time. Questioning, and this kind of a questioning civilization spread its power all over. Anybody who came to India as an invader was assimilated in India. They ruled India, but they were assimilated and became Indians. Now, we've seen the peril of people trying to project power physically in the two great wars. 16, 20 million people died in the First World War, 60 million people died in the Second World War, and then we had the atomic bomb. Then people all in the world realized that wars are no longer winnable. So the use of violence as a means of power is gone. But people realize that the real power is soft power. The power to influence, the power to make the world a better place, and the power to make sure that you have a global influence all over. And America has done that extremely well. Possibly the greatest country ever created, the land of the free, where 90% of humanity wants to come. I do hope you open your doors so everybody can come to California. It's ultimate nirvana for every human being on this planet. Please don't shut the doors to all those poor people who are knocking on the doors. They want to come here, listen to Vinod Khosla all the time. So America has projected its soft power through its universities. The brightest young people come to the US to study here. They went to England before the First World War because that was a global power. Now they come here. Hollywood, technology, Google, Facebook, all these have an ability to project America's soft power. And soft power is what dominates America's ability to influence the world, though sometimes some American political leaders do think that pressing a button to nuke somebody is a very interesting idea. So we have this example of the United States much before us. And India too has been an example. Now, I would like to make 2-3 comments about Shashi, then invite him to speak because I'm sure you're wanting to listen to him. He's had 3 decades of experience in international affairs. He studied in St. Stephen's College, Delhi. He won all the debates across India, lived in Calcutta, in what was then the greatest city east of London. A prolific author, written 16 books on varied subjects. He went to Oxford recently and had a debate about India's colonial experience with Great Britain. And you could imagine the UK has forgotten about the fact they ruled the world for a long period of time. And I must tell you, people in America, the British came and conquered India and ruled India because Washington defeated Cornwallis in the Battle of Yorktown, and Cornwallis sailed to India. If at all there is somebody to blame for 200 years of colonial rule, well, you know who it is. So, he's a much sought-after commentator on politics and diplomacy. He writes columns. He's a great hope for India and a person who dreams of a world where everybody will live in peace and prosperity. He dreams of a world where soft power will pervade, and he dreams of the world where people will settle any arguments through a debate rather than anything else. I present to you Dr. Shashi Tharoor.
Thank you so much, Mohandas Pai. In fact, this morning I tweeted that Mohandas is going to be in the chair and that therefore I was bracing myself for some friendly fire. Because as you know, we don't exactly share the same political persuasions in the Indian context. But thank you so much for all the friendly and none of the fire. Very touched. I'm sure that after he's heard my remarks, the fire will follow. Yeah, thank you. Seems to be wobbly a bit. Anyway, great to be with you all. I think Mohandas has done a terrific job of introducing the theme of my keynote. I was asked specifically, going back to a speech I made at a TED conference 8 years ago on why nations should pursue soft power using the Indian example. The organizers wanted me to talk to you about how has this changed in recent years and what exactly India can do to, I'm quoting the organizers here, craft a better perception of India in the global community. Well, as India rises in the 21st century, there's no question that much has been written and said over our increasing prowess in the traditional sense. The 4th largest standing army in the world, consistent economic growth in the last couple of decades. So many have spoken of the country as a future world leader, or even as the next superpower, quote unquote, alongside the other Asian giant, China. But as I've been pointing out for years, I'm not terribly comfortable with such phrases. The only world leadership we can realistically aspire to seems to be in the population charts, where we are set to overtake China, according to the UN demographers, by 2024. That'll be the one thing we're number 1 at. And as for being the next superpower, we haven't yet overcome the key problem that we're still super poor and are not yet able to feed, educate, and employ all our people. And that's partly why I focused on soft power instead, pioneering the argument with the blessings of the concept's inventor, my friend Joseph Nye of Harvard. Nye coined the term in 1990 to account for the influence that a country wields beyond its military, economic, or hard power. Traditionally, power in world politics was seen in terms of military power, right? The side with a larger army was always considered likely to win. But even in the past, this wasn't enough. After all, the US lost the Vietnam War, the Soviet Union was defeated in Afghanistan, and the US discovered in its first few years in Iraq after the fall of Baghdad the wisdom of Talleyrand's adage that the one thing you cannot do with a bayonet is to sit on it. So what worked for the conquest didn't work for the occupation. Now that's where the issue of soft power comes in. As Nye put it, a country's power rests on its ability to alter the behavior of others to get what it wants. And so he says there are three ways you can do that. There's coercion, or sticks. There's payments, inducements, or carrots. And there's attraction, or soft power. If you have the ability to attract others through your cultural assets, your values, your foreign policies, then you can economize on the sticks and the carrots. Now take this country, for instance, and Mohandas has already alluded to this. The US has traditionally been a haven for immigrants, the land of the American dream, the promise that anyone can be anything if they work hard enough here. It's also the home of Boeing and Intel, of Google and Apple, of Microsoft and MTV, Hollywood and Disneyland, Diet Coke and Levi's jeans, McDonald's and Starbucks. In short, some of the most recognizable and influential brands and industries around the world. The attractiveness of these assets and of the American lifestyle they represent is that they enable the US to persuade rather than compel others to adopt its agenda. Indeed, while the US has used officially sponsored initiatives from the Voice of America to the Fulbright scholarships to promote its soft power around the world, arguably Hollywood and MTV have done far more to promote the idea of America as a desirable and admirable society than the US, or than any US governmental endeavor could have done. So soft power, in other words, is only created partly by governments and partly despite governments, partly by deliberate action, partly by accident. That's why it used to be said that even the demonstrators outside American embassies around the world were chanting, "Yankee, go home, but take me with you." Now, in this sense, soft power acts both as an alternative and a complement to hard power. Soft power is what people think about a country as soon as they hear its name mentioned. Hard power is what they feel when they confront a country. Hard power is exercised, soft power is evoked. Now, at TED, I had spent some time discussing the profound transformations India has gone through in recent decades, the importance of connectivity, for example, and the overall design of the country's soft power. Because in today's information era, we have a country now where almost every Indian owns a cell phone. Just last year, we've crossed 1 billion mobile subscriptions, making us the second largest group of mobile users anywhere in the world, after China, but we're growing faster than China. And this, as I mentioned then, has resulted in the empowerment of the underclass and in its own way helped develop India's soft power capabilities. Technology has transformed the lives of ordinary people, of the Aam Aadmi. I'd mentioned how fishermen in India are now equipped with cellular devices. Fishermen, for example, returning with they have GPS that shows them where the best shoals of fish are. Once they catch the fish and they're returning, they can call any market town along the coast on their mobile phones to find out where they'll get the best price and make an informed decision where to sell their catch. Now, I mention this because in today's world of instant mass communications, enabled by the internet, countries are increasingly judged by a global public fed on an incessant diet of internet news, televised images, videos taken on the cell phones of passers-by and zapped around on WhatsApp, email gossip. Now, this has significant implications, including the fact that countries can no longer monopolize official information, and that their use of hard power is more scrutinized than ever. Now, the 16th anniversary of 9/11 is just 3 days away. The outpouring of goodwill for Washington in the wake of 9/11. I think of Le Monde's famous assertion, "We're all Americans now," which actually echoed something I'd said on CNN the very same night when I said we're all New Yorkers now. And the squandering of that goodwill by America's over-reliance on hard power in the invasion and occupation of Iraq and the related global war on terror are instructive. The steep decline, for example, in America's image and standing is a direct reflection of global distaste for the instruments of American hard power at that time. The Iraq invasion, Guantanamo, Abu Ghraib, torture, rendition, Blackwater's killings of Iraqi civilians, all of this drumbeat of bad news, one after the other. And so the existing soft power assets of the US clearly proved inadequate to compensate for the deficiencies of its hard power approach. Fans of American culture were not prepared to overlook the excesses of Guantanamo. Using Microsoft Windows does not predispose you in favor of extraordinary rendition. So the misuse of hard power can undermine your soft power around the world. Now, what does this mean for India? It means acknowledging that India's claims to a global leadership role in the 21st century lie in the aspects and products of Indian society and culture that the world finds attractive. These assets may not directly persuade others to support India, but they go a long way towards enhancing India's intangible standing in the world's eyes. Now, the roots of India's soft power run deep. India's is a civilization that over millennia has offered refuge and, more important, religious and cultural freedom to Jews. Mohandas mentioned the story, Parsis, it's an even better story, several varieties of Christians and Muslims. Every imaginable faith or creed flourished here. Indeed, the British historian E.P. Thompson wrote that our heritage of diversity is what makes India the most important country for the future of the world. And I quote him here, "All the convergent influences of the world," he wrote, "run through this society. There is not a thought that is being thought in the West or the East that is not active in some Indian mind." Now, I'm glad a Brit said that and not an Indian, but that Indian mind has been shaped by remarkably diverse forces. Ancient Hindu tradition, myth and scripture, the impact of Islam and Christianity, and 2 centuries of British colonial rule. The result is unique. Though there are some who think and speak of India as a Hindu Rashtra, the Indian civilization that we see today is an evolved hybrid. We are a land of rich diversities. I've observed in the past in some of my books and writings that we are all minorities in India. This land imposes no narrow conformities on its citizens. You can be many things and one thing. You can be a good Muslim, a good Keralite, and a good Indian all at once. So the idea of India is of one land embracing many. It's the idea that Indians can endure differences of caste, creed, color, culture, cuisine, conviction, custom and costume, and still rally around a consensus. And that democratic consensus around the simple principle that in a large, diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, except on the ground rules of how you will disagree. Acceptance of difference, rather than mere tolerance, has been the great Indian secret. And that has been the strength of Indian soft power. We've always managed to maintain consensus on how to manage without consensus. As I've said before, India isn't a melting pot like America, it's a thali, a collection of dishes on a platter. Each dish tastes different. It's in its own bowl, so it doesn't necessarily flow into the next, but they all belong together on the same plate, and they complement each other in making the meal a satisfying repast. That's what India is all about. Water? I'd have somebody else's water here, but I wouldn't mind one of my own. Sorry, thanks. No, that's not mine, that's somebody's left over here. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, since I mentioned the thali, let me say that cuisine is an area of soft power influence. The French have long known that the way to someone's heart is through his palate. The late British Foreign Secretary Robin Cook once said that Britain's national dish was no longer fish and chips, it was chicken tikka masala. UK curry houses today employ more people than the coal mining, shipbuilding, and iron and steel industries combined, so the empire can strike back. But India's soft power is not just what is represented by the allure of biryani, Bollywood, and Bhangra, the kinds of things I did speak about at that TED conference 8 years ago. Rather, even more important are the values and principles for which India stands. After all, Mahatma Gandhi won India its independence through the use of soft power, because non-violence and satyagraha were indeed classic uses of soft power, of moral force, before those terms were even coined. India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, was also a skilled exponent of soft power. He developed a role for India in the world based entirely on its civilizational history and moral standing, making India the voice of the oppressed and the marginalized against the big power hegemons of the day. This gave the country enormous standing and prestige across the world and strengthened our own self-respect as we stood, proud and independent, on the world stage. But of course, soft power comes with its own set of limitations, as Nehru himself was unfortunate enough to have witnessed during his time. The greatest flaw in Nehru's approach was that his soft power was unrelated to the acquisition of hard power. As the humiliation of the military defeat by China in 1962 demonstrated, soft power has crippling limitations in national security terms. Because instead of Theodore Roosevelt's famous maxim, speak softly and carry a big stick, Nehru's India spoke loudly but carried no stick at all. In a tough neighborhood, the rhetoric of peace can only take you so far. Soft power becomes credible when there is hard power behind it. That's why the US has been able to make so much of its soft power. Recent Indian history offers a somewhat mixed picture when it comes to the effective use of hard power. Within our own subcontinent, India is often caught in a cleft stick on such matters. It often treads softly in its anxiety not to come across as an Asian bully. And in so doing, it emboldens those who are prepared to test it. As a result, it has been noticeably reluctant to evolve a strategic doctrine based on hard power. There is a sense in which most Indians still think that would be unseemly. This is also sometimes perceived to be the case by foreigners, which may help explain the recent Chinese probe into the Doklam Plateau in Bhutan. Fortunately, India's swift and effective response, coupled with skillful diplomacy, resolved that episode. Now, of course, New Delhi knows that its soft power cannot solve its security challenges. After all, an Islamist terrorist who enjoys a Bollywood movie will still have no compunction about setting off a bomb in a Delhi market. We've known that to happen. The US already learned that the perpetrators of 9/11 ate their last dinner at a McDonald's. To counter the threat of terrorism, there is no substitute for hard power. But India knows that soft power lasts longer and has a wider, more self-reinforcing reach. For China and Russia, kung fu movies of the Bolshoi Ballet will win more admirers internationally than the People's Liberation Army or Siberian oil reserves, even if in each case it is what the state relies on. The latter is what the state relies on. Hard power without soft power stirs up resentments and enmities. Soft power without hard power is a confession of weakness. We need both, what Hillary Clinton, no longer quoted much, dubbed smart power. Yet hard power tends to work better domestically rather than internationally. An autocratic state is not concerned about having a soft power narrative for its own people, but without one, it has little with which to acquire the goodwill of the rest of the world. Whether it's the Chinese in Tibet or the Russians in Ukraine, it can be said that in each case, a major military power won the hard power battle, but lost the soft power war. Where soft power works in security terms is in attracting enough goodwill from ordinary people around the world to reduce the sources of support and succor that the terrorists enjoy, and without which they cannot function. Now, India's soft power has held up well in today's globalizing world. Globalization has both sparked and allayed many Indians' fears that economic liberalization will bring with it cultural imperialism of a particularly insidious kind, that Game of Thrones and burgers will supplant Garba and Bhelpuri, But instead, India's experience with Western consumer products has demonstrated convincingly that we can drink Coca-Cola without becoming Coca-colonized. Indians will not become any less Indian if, in Mahatma Gandhi's famous metaphor from more than 70 years ago, we open the doors and windows of our country and let foreign winds blow through our house. Because Indians are strong enough not to be blown off our feet by these winds. Our popular culture has proved resilient enough to compete successfully with MTV and McDonald's. Besides, the strength of Indianness lies in many ways in its ability to absorb foreign influences and to transform them by peculiarly Indian alchemy into something that belongs naturally on the soil of India. Like McDonald's selling McTikkie burgers now. That's how we transform global products. But indeed, from the export of Bollywood to Bhangra, India has demonstrated that it's a player in globalization, not merely a subject of it. India benefits from the future and the past, from the international appeal of its traditional practices, from Ayurveda to yoga, both accelerating in popularity across the globe, and the transformed image of the country created by its thriving diaspora, the in-diaspora that is sitting here, so well represented here. Now, though recent years have witnessed India's growing consciousness of its soft power, we still lack the more systematic development of a soft power strategy. So far, such strategic advantages that have accrued from India's soft power, goodwill for our country amongst African, Arab, and Afghan publics, for instance, has been a largely unplanned byproduct of the normal emanations of Indian culture. The popularity of Indian movies and TV shows in these parts of the world, for instance. Such goodwill has not been systematically harnessed as a strategic asset by New Delhi. It's ironic that in and around the 2008 Beijing Olympics, authoritarian China showed a greater determination to use its hard power strengths to cultivate a soft power strategy for itself on the world stage. India will not need to try as hard, but it will need to do more than it currently does to leverage its natural soft power into a valuable instrument of its global strategy. Some promising beginnings can be discerned. In recent years, a near unanimous decision by the United Nations to adopt an International Day of Yoga has been a notable coup for the government of India. Yoga's use as a soft power tool has been flourishing in a variety of ways. Our ambassador in Lisbon, for example, Ambassador Ashok, if you listen to this, Nandini Singla, she holds daily yoga classes every day at her official residence for other ambassadors, and the dozen or so ambassadors who come regularly are exposed to India in this unusual way and will leave their Lisbon posting with goodwill towards India that should outlast this assignment. But to leverage India's success in an area that matters to the world of the 21st century, we have to push our innovative technology. The fact is, if you Google the words frugal innovation, you will find the first 20 hits all relate to India. And it's a reflection of our country's increasing aptitude at becoming a global player. Indian innovators have transformed the world of medicine by inventing the world's cheapest electrocardiogram machine and reducing the cost of a hepatitis B vaccine from $15 a shot to 10 cents. The small budget Tata Nano car, though it's considered a domestic marketing disaster in India, was a triumph of no-frills engineering to world-class standards and took the Geneva Auto Salon by storm. That sparked off talk of Indovation, or Indian innovation. I was even asked to inaugurate an Indian Innovation Center at the University of Toronto. And when the Mangalyaan spacecraft slipped into orbit around Mars, India became the first country in the world to successfully reach the red planet on its first attempt. Not even the US managed on its first attempt. But even more impressively, India's space agency put the satellite into orbit for just $74 million a fraction of the $671 million cost of the US probe, and lower than the budget of the Hollywood space movie Gravity. It's all a far cry from the days when Jamshedji Tata tried in the teeth of British opposition to set up a steel factory at the beginning of the 20th century and the end of the 19th first. A colonial official sneered at that time, a Brit, that he would personally eat every ounce of steel that an Indian was capable of producing. It's a pity he didn't live to see the day that a descendant of Tata bought the remnants of British steel by acquiring Chorus 9 years ago. It might have given him a bad case of indigestion. But that kind of triumph alone is not enough to ensure a country's soft power. In the information age, Joseph Nye has argued, it's not the side with the bigger army that wins, but the side with a better story that wins. In the past, India has successfully managed to be the land of the better story. As a society with a free press and a thriving mass media, where the people's creative energies are daily encouraged to express themselves in a variety of appealing ways, India has an extraordinary ability to tell stories that are more persuasive and more attractive than those of its rivals. This is not about propaganda. Indeed, it will not work if it's directed from above, and least of all by the government. But conversely, government actions can undermine the story. And indeed, troubling internal disruptions have begun to tarnish the global perception of India. If any one of you here picks up an international daily of repute, such as the New York Times or the Washington Post in this country, or Le Monde or Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung in Europe, to look for stories about India, you'd be assailed by reportage on incidents of communal violence, cow vigilantism, minorities feeling besieged, and the alienating effects of the present ruling party's disposition towards a narrow-minded Hindutva ideology. Even less traditional news outlets and programs, such as Vice and John Oliver's popular Last Week Tonight show, have picked up on this disturbing trend in India. The recent murder of Gauri Lankesh, the journalist, who was critical of these tendencies, raises India high on the list of countries where journalists are perceived to be in danger. In this super-connected world, people across the globe are now more than ever aware of the incidents of beef violence, the rise of Gaurakshaks, the assassinations of rationalists, and the episodes of mob lynching that have taken place in India in the last couple of years. Instead of strongly condemning these incidents immediately and bringing the elements that have perpetrated them to heel, our dominant political dispensation has instead decided that their energies are best spent making unbecoming statements about everything from disowning the Taj Mahal as a symbol of Indian culture to the cleansing, quote unquote, by a minister of Western cultural influences from India's ethos, unquote. Remember, the better story is not merely the story that can be told. It is the story that is heard and seen and repeated, whether or not you are trying to tell it. That is what the Indian government and ruling circles seem to be in danger of overlooking. For millennia, India offered a haven to the persecuted, a refuge to Jews after the destruction of their temple by the Babylonians and the Romans, a new home for Parsis fleeing Islamic persecution in Iran, Tibetans fleeing Chinese communism, Sri Lankan Tamils, Nepalese fleeing their civil war, and most famously 10 million Bengalis escaping the Pakistani army's crackdown in 1971, the largest recorded refugee crisis in the history of humanity. In all this, India's humanitarian record has been exemplary and has been admired around the world. Yet last week, our present government announced a unilateral decision to deport all members of the Rohingya refugee community in India back to Myanmar, where a state-sponsored genocide is currently taking place in the Rakhine state against this ethnic group. This move, which seems prompted by the fact that the Rohingya are Muslim and therefore are being accused without evidence of supporting terrorism, has invited strong condemnation across the board and has damaged the popular perception of India as a land of democracy and asylum. As a result of all these developments, a global impression has gained ground that India is now governed by obscurantist and intolerant forces determined to put minorities, rationalists, and liberals in their place. This has far-reaching implications for India and threatens to derail our country's soft power projection. It's a far cry from the time of the 2004 elections. I remember when I was traveling at that time as a UN official through the Gulf, senior officials I was meeting with in the Gulf countries expressed their astonishment and their admiration about the election results, where a party led by an Italian woman of Roman Catholic faith had made way for a Sikh to be sworn in by a Muslim president as prime minister in a country where 80% of the population are Hindus. To go from that celebration of diversity to a time when our president, vice president, and prime minister are all followers of a sectarian Hindu chauvinist movement is a fall indeed in the eyes of the world. I've repeatedly argued in the recent past that we cannot simultaneously sell ourselves to the world as a land of pluralism, tolerance, and Gandhianism, while promoting or condoning intolerance, communal hatred, and minority insecurity within the country. The present government would do well to learn that they cannot promote Make in India abroad while condoning the propagation of hate in India at home. However, that said, as a cautious optimist, I still believe that India can reverse this recent trend. It continues to have a thriving free press, a strong watchguard in its civil society and its courts, the latter, which only last week has passed verdicts that have struck down triple talaq, upheld an Indian citizen's fundamental right to privacy, and convicted a popular godman for rape, despite an overwhelming show of force and violence from his supporters. I believe it's these principled elements of India's society, along with our civilizational ethos, and there Mohandas and I would agree, that are and will continue to be an immeasurable asset for our country. This is soft power, and we don't have to thank the government for it. When people argue that cultural diplomacy is important, they tend to focus on what governments can do to showcase culture and promote Indian society. I believe the message that really matters, and the one that gets through abroad, is that of who we are, not what we want to show. As an opposition member of parliament, that's my message to the Indian government too. Don't change our invaluable traditions. Don't try to remake India in a way that will actually damage its soft power. We as a society have celebrated our own diversity, our own democracy, and our own pluralism, and the world has admired us for these very things. Today, we've unfortunately given free rein to those who have promoted bigotry and intolerance that should have no place in the narrative of Indian society. And that's why people like me believe it's so important to resist them. Resist them not in a purely political or partisan spirit, but as proud Indians who are conscious of what we are proud of in our civilization. We must be conscious of the qualities that are so attractive in our culture and that give us soft power in the world, and we must ensure that these qualities are not undermined by recklessly irresponsible, often semi-educated individuals who've been given a free hand by some of those in power who should know better. I believe that the principal ingredients for India's soft power success continue to remain. But in order to realize that potential, India needs to address its own internal challenges first. It's essential that we don't allow the specter of religious intolerance and political opportunism to undermine the soft power that's our greatest asset in the world of the 21st century. Our democracy, our media, our contentious civil society forums, our energetic human rights groups, and the repeated spectacle of our remarkable general elections. All of these together make India a rare example of the successful management of diversity in our globalized world. It adds to India's soft power when its non-governmental organizations actively defend human rights, promote environmentalism, fight injustice. It's a vital asset that the Indian press is free, that there are Gauri Lankeshas in the country, that it's lively, irreverent, disdainful of sacred cows. Maintain that, and true leadership in our globalizing world, the kind that has to do with principles, values, and standards, will follow. If we succeed in maintaining our heritage as a diverse and democratic country, open to the contention of ideas and interests within it, unafraid of the prowess of the products of the outside world, wedded to the democratic pluralism that is our greatest strength, and determined to liberate and fulfill the creative energies of our people, then I believe such an India will tell the stories that the rest of the world wants to hear and is glad to repeat. that may well be the most valuable way in which we can offer leadership in the 21st century world. Thank you. Now comes the friendly fire from Mohandas.
Folks, I think there's a very fascinating exposition of the place of soft power and hard power in many countries. Shashi, as a global thinker, a global leader, a thought leader, is expressing the agony of many people in many countries around the world who face a situation where there's political change and where there are people with alternate views who come in this country, in my country, and in Europe too, who alternate views, and the need for all of us to come together and expose those great ideas of soft power, we can take humanity forward. And this is a challenge that everybody has to face. And of course, being an opposition party leader, Shashi does have to take a very hard stand, because when he comes back to India, people must not clamor for his blood, and it happened to him many times. Now, the floor is open to all of you to ask questions. Yes, sir, please. Yes, sir.
Shashi, I'll be short, but one of the things that you said about being soft power, from the civil society to the courts, all doing the fantastic work.
A little closer.
So one of the things that I think we are missing here is that electoral people sitting on the bottom of the pyramid, who are yet yearning for decency in living and decency or security for the woman. So my question to you as a politician is, like, what do you see as the kind of realization from that perspective on that electoral to fight their own elections, learning the importance of that federal system about I'm not talking about any rookie party over being in Delhi or any newcomer here, but what do you think as an entrepreneurship in the people coming into electoral, fighting their own elections and being participant in the whole electoral process, and the importance of that realization?
It is important. It's happening to some degree at the local election level. But unfortunately, because the size of our country and our population is so large, fighting elections becomes an expensive business for ordinary individuals. In a village panchayat at best, an ordinary person on his or her own resources can prevail with the goodwill of the people who know him or her. When you get to larger constituencies, you need that party machinery, you need large-scale funding. I, as an MP, represent 2 million people. Now, how do you expect to reach that number of people without a substantial resource base, a large army of volunteers, and a certain spread right across to be able to get your message across? It's not easy. And therefore, it becomes a challenge in a democracy our size to be able to give the truly voiceless a voice. You can find people prepared to speak for them. Their votes still count. One of the striking things in India, that by contrast with American democracies, before Obama was a candidate in 2008, the highest turnout in Harlem in the presidential elections had been 23%. In America, the poor don't vote. Democracy is a middle-class sport. Whereas in India, it's the opposite. It's not the affluent who are going to stand 4 hours in the hot sun to cast their ballot. But the turnout amongst the really poor in India is phenomenal. It's over 90%. And they come because they know this is the one time they have the power to make a difference. And so every MP candidate is very conscious of the fact that a majority of his or her voters are people living on less than $2 a day, and that he'd better be able to appeal to their needs, which partly explains a lot of the populism in our politics also. It doesn't mean that they themselves can necessarily be the candidates very easily, but if they work through a political party, they could rise to that too. But the main point is that their concerns are very much dominant in the minds of most of the electable politicians.
Pramod?
Yes. Shashi, just 2 questions actually. You've talked a lot about what some of the recent events that are happening in India. But of course, if you go back in history, almost any party has played up to these levels. It's all relative. Salman Rushdie's book was banned before it was read by your party, by many other people. Lots of other instances like that.
It wasn't my party then, and I was a critic of that decision, but fair enough.
All right, but I'll take that back, but by a party. And these events have continued to happen. So one question is, how do we rise out of this morass that we seem to get stuck in so often and focus on the real needs in the country where implementation and administration of government remains woefully inadequate to do the things it needs to do? And then the second question is a little more of a friendly fire question, which is, when do you think we'll get a real opposition in our country in recent times?
Okay, well, as far as the first question is concerned, I agree totally with you. That is that implementation has always been our biggest challenge. I remember I'm the board of Aspen, and Aspen India wanted to hold an ideas festival like the Aspen America does. And I said, why? We're not lacking in ideas. What we should hold is an implementation festival so we can actually implement some of the ideas that have already been kicking around for so long. And that's really a genuine problem we have in our country. I'm not sure it's lack of capacity. The capacity in the formal sense, the structure, the officials, etc. are there. There is something wrong with the work culture, which probably goes back to the colonial era, Mohandas and my favorite bugbear, which is that the purpose of governance had not been very much intended to improve people's lot, but rather to sit on top of them and suppress them as much as possible. And that mentality has not completely been shaken off, I think, particularly at the lower echelons. I was speaking to a friend this morning about the fact that I happen to, as Mohandas was hinting, I happen to agree with a lot of what Mr. Modi says on economics. I mean, his speeches, his diagnoses of what goes on in the country are pretty much spot on. But where I have a problem with him is in precisely the lack of implementation. So soon after winning, he makes a speech, I remember, very soon after his victory, where he lamented the fact that in India it takes 200 steps to open a store, whereas in America he says it takes only 6. Now, I don't know if those figures are accurate, but the Prime Minister of India said that. Passionate speech, well-spoken. He moves on to the next speech, the next topic, and 3 years later, it still takes 200 steps to open a store. So the question is, if the Prime Minister can't get that done, then why bother to speak about it? Because ultimately, you're not an op-ed columnist, you are the person in charge of transforming the society. And that's the real challenge we've got in India, is how do we manage? Now, I'm told by defenders, including the person I was speaking to, that it's happening, that there are committees at work, that rules are being rewritten, and that eventually, in the fullness of time, all this will happen and be changed. But then the question is, how long are we supposed to wait? I mean, I turned around, and that links to your second question, I turned around and counter-asked a question. Will the young sort of 20-year-old in Uttar Pradesh who voted for Mr. Modi because he was promised jobs, will he still vote for Modi 5 years from now when he doesn't have a job? And he won't have a job because, in fact, there's been negative net growth in job creation in India under the Modi administration. So, I mean, Mohandas can give us more officially sanctified figures, but the government's
Shashi never gets his facts right.
The government's own figures officially released in Parliament, of which I'm a member, shows the highest performance in the last 3 years of 113,000 jobs being created against a promise of 2 million or 2 crore. Or
that is a survey, Shashi. I'll give you the database. Look at we'll argue it separately.
I'm very open to correction as long as the people who are going to cast those ballots actually have the jobs. You'll be proven right. Now, on the question of the opposition, we're caught in a cleft stick. If we are vocal and effective and oppose, we are accused of being unconstructive and dragging the country down, and can't we work together for the benefit of the country? If we cooperate with the government in passing certain bills, as we've done, we're told, where is there a real opposition? How can we do without an opposition? It's a thankless task in many ways. I'd love to find out what you mean by a real opposition. We stand up on issues of principle, as I've just done today. I mean, I've been a long-term advocate of soft power. And I would have been happy and proud to speak of soft power without reference to any criticism of government, because to my mind, soft power is very much about what a society is all about, far more than what a government does. But when a government is allowing things to happen that are actively undermining soft power, not to address it would have been hypocritical, so I addressed it. But the fact is that it's on the basis of principles. I have been careful not to oppose for opposition's sake, which I'm sorry to say is what the BJP did. We know from WikiLeaks that BJP leaders were reassuring American envoys when they were in opposition that they weren't really opposed to the Indo-US nuclear deal, but because they were in opposition, they had to oppose it publicly. And that's what the Americans were reporting back in their cables. Now, to my mind, that's hypocrisy, and it's borderline anti-national. If you genuinely believe this is good for the country, speak up for it. If you think it's bad, say so. So, for example, we had come up with the idea of GST. When the government adopted it, we applauded them for changing their mind because they'd been the biggest obstructors of GST for 10 years. Then when they started blatantly tampering with the bill in order to serve very short-term political interests, such as introducing a differential between producer states and consumer states, we opposed it ferociously tooth and nail. And we got them to back down and take that new provision out of the GST. And then finally, after much back and forth and strong opposition, we compromised on the national interest and passed the bill. Now, to my mind, that's what a constructive opposition does. You know, you oppose on principle when it really matters. You give in sometimes because you know they have the votes, and also because the public has, after all, voted them to power, and you shouldn't obstruct them. And then you act in what you deem to be the national interest, so we passed it. Now we are criticizing the implementation of GST. Having 7 GSTs is a world record, and it's absurd. Leaving out what they've left out, including what they've included, is ridiculous. The way in which the provisions have been drawn up are preposterous, so that, you know, a pastry is at 1%, the pastry is chocolate icing, it's at a different percentage. It's absurd. I mean, the way in which the government is doing their job. I mean, taxation, for example. We've gone along with many of their tax proposals, but we've strictly opposed, and we've lost a vote on things that have enabled tax inspectors to have powers that they've never had during the many decades when the BJP was accusing our government of promoting tax terrorism. Now a low-level tax inspector can arrest people, and better still, can intimidate them with the prospect of arrest in order to take bribes. It's going to be a disastrous situation for people, and this has been made possible by the very BJP government that used to talk about tax terrorism. They've actually created tax terrorists through law. Now, all of these things we've been opposing. I would love to know where you feel we've been asleep with a switch. I think the opposition's very much there. Our positions are a matter of record. We are saying this in public rallies, we're saying it on the street, and we're saying it in the media.
Well, a lady member, we need some gender diversity and inclusion, acceptance, like Shashi always stands for.
Held by a gentleman.
Yes, please. Then we'll close. A lady member, please. Yes, madam.
Thank you so much for visiting us at Haas Business School. So I don't think we can let you off without talking about this book. Fantastic. I've read the first 10 pages. It's amazing.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about your thought process?
Gosh, okay. Well, actually, this is a subject on which Mohandas and I totally agree, because he sweetly bought 100 copies and made me give them away to his friends. I mean, he paid for it. He paid for it.
Paid for it.
So the point is that here it just simply wasn't related to the topic as such, but I do agree that there's a lot of the challenges that India is facing that are a relic of that period. The book she's referring to, which is called An Era of Darkness in India, and which will be published in the US next year under its Western title, which is Inglorious Empire, What the British Did to India, is the story of how, after Britain came to what was one of the richest countries in the world, with 27% of global GDP in 1700 and 23% in 1800, and over 200 years of exploitation, depredation, taxation, loot. And loot, by the way, was a word that they stole from India as well and included in their dictionaries as well as their habits. The British reduced in 200 years this rich country into one of the poorest in the world, going from that large percentage of GDP to about just over 3% of global GDP, and leaving it behind with 90% of its population below the poverty line as a result of British policies. So it's a description of all of that, an analysis, and it's also a refutation of the large number of apologists for the British Empire who in recent years have written accounts arguing the British Empire was, in the words of the famous Professor Neil Ferguson, a jolly good thing, and I explain why it wasn't a jolly good thing. So it goes on in some detail about that. So it's for history buffs, but it's not for scholars, it's for lay people. It's written, I hope, in a lively and passionate enough style that you'll get a sense of why these arguments matter as we've closed in on the 70th anniversary of India's liberation from British rule.
Folks, we run out of time, so I have to end this by just concluding. We had a great talk by Shashi, and I think Shashi is a person who carries India in his heart, who goes around, talks to people, and he wants to bring into play the India that he always dreamt about as a young man and as a person who was around the world and now back in India fighting the battle for all of us to make a constitution really effective for all the people in India. Shashi, thank you very much for a fascinating talk. Folks, join me in a standing ovation for a great